Hello, friends, if there are friends to be had out in the wide world. Welcome to another edition of the Ludomusicology Literature Review. With me today is Will. Hi, Will.
Hello.
I'm so excited that you are here because
I'm glad to be here.
I love this. I love this piece so much. You presented this, what, at Hartford, NACFAGM?
Yes, it was in Hartford. Yeah.
Yes. So today we're going to be looking at what is it like to be a dolphin, echolocation and subjectivity in video games. So I got to pull some really good graphics for this. And we have some folks popping in. Hello, friends. Welcome. It's good to see you. Karen says it was me. Yeah, it was at Karen's hosting. Beautiful job hosting us in Hartford.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for saying the artwork continues to be excellent. I really like making PowerPoints like when I give a conference presentation. So now I get to do like that, the fun part of that without actually having to do the work. I
Yeah.
just have to read what you all do, and then my gift is making them look really pretty on the screen. Julianne actually had me send her mine. So yeah, if anybody ever wants theirs, I have them. I can just send them to you, and then if you ever present the work, you can just like adapt the PowerPoint with all the pretty graphics. Hello, Julianne. Welcome.
Oh,
Oh yeah,
Julianne also
everyone's
got a
getting Billie
Billie
Eilish
Eilish. Yeah,
ads, which makes me happy because I love Billie Eilish.
that's great.
So yeah, this is also why we BS a little at the beginning because folks tuning in have to sit through the ad and then they don't miss too much. Anyway, so this was presented originally at Hartford, and then turn the slide here, and then it ended up in JSMIG. So in the second edition or second volume, I guess, to number 3 in 2021. So tell me a little bit about where this came from, and then the process of getting us into this lovely article.
Yeah, so I don't really know if there was any beginning to this in my work because it doesn't really relate a lot to other things I was doing ahead of this, but I kind of remember listening to a podcast that's by Sean Carroll. I don't know if anybody knows the Mindscape podcast, but he's a physicist and philosopher. And so I was listening to that podcast, and a guy, David Chalmers, who I cite in this paper,
Yeah.
went on and talked about this Tom Nagel uh, article that I'm using as kind of the jumping off point. And I just thought it was really fascinating. And I just kind of went from there, and I thought about like, what is the subjective experience really like of these echolocating creatures? What does that mean in terms of our subjective experience in general? And then just kind of the ball started rolling to think about this. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Yeah. So then conference paper, and
yeah,
then was the response just really good? I know some of us. I know I came up to you and I was like, I loved that.
yeah.
Um,
The response was good, but I also got like comments. Neil Lerner gave me great comments and said, you really didn't dig too much into and this is the other part of the article, beyond like just a subjective experience. I only had like a little bit at the end that was about disability studies, and he came up to me and he was like, there's a lot of information about this and you can dig in. And
yeah.
so I really had this choice after I got done with the article. I could kind of gone two ways, like stick to the Dolphins, do this kind of singular purpose paper, or try and make something that's a little bit more broad. But
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know any of that disability studies literature, so I had to kind of dig in. And so it took about a year before the actual article was ready to go after that presentation. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love. It's like always a bit of an oh when Neil approaches you
Neil,
after a paper, but it's always because he has something amazing to like,
yeah,
to take the work to the next place.
yeah.
Um,
At literally at every NACFAGM conference, I'm pretty sure that Neil has been the first person to ask me a question, almost always. And there's some things about my research that I can understand why he is the one who is coming up and asking these questions because it aligns with him. I did like some silent film things, and
mm-hmm.
that's aligned with what he did. And
Oh, your
this,
stacking paper got into that, right?
yeah, so stacking paper, and then like from that did some like topics stuff. So yeah, the stacking paper was that first conference in 2014 or something like
Hmm.
that. So
Yeah,
um,
I was just talking about that on the stream last night
yeah,
because I was mentioning you coming on today, and I was just saying every single paper I've ever seen from you, you present really well. First of all, you just have a really great presentation style.
thank you so
Every
much.
piece of it is like really well put together, but then the thoughts are always so polished, and then you also just like dig into these areas that people aren't really thinking of doing. So I feel like the takes are always like super unique. I'm thinking of like the death paper that you did. I think that was in Texas.
Yeah.
um, and just like yeah you dig into these little corners and like every single thing, yeah, guaranteed bop, exactly as Julianne put it.
Nice,
Guaranteed
nice.
bop. And how I had stacking in my Steam wish list, and then like years later I played it, and I
Excellent
wouldn't have
game.
even probably come across that game or thought to really seek it out if I hadn't seen that paper, and I
Yeah.
enjoyed it 10 times more because I had seen that paper.
Yeah, shout out to Double Fine. It's a great
Yeah.
studio, and they put out so many excellent games, and I just love that game. I think it's and that I got to write that first paper because you talked about this in some of your other streams. I want to talk about it too. Like that was the first video game paper that I wrote, that stacking paper, and I got to write it for a Chopin and Brahms seminar. And so the amount of the ability to be able to do that in an academic setting, it was just starting around that time. And then luckily this conference came at around that time too. So it kind of served that double purpose, which was amazing. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I loved that paper. It's nice when the first one you give goes well too.
yeah,
Um,
I hope it went well. I mean, your first paper was amazing, obviously. We
I was yeah, Julianne was mentioning that on her stream, and I was like scared out of my wits because I had gone to an AMS that previous November, and that was like the only conferencing I had done. So this
yeah,
was like the second thing right in
yeah,
January.
yeah.
Um, and then I was also the first paper the first day, so I was like, ah, I have to start the conference. Like that
Yeah,
was
I was the
scary.
second paper, so I had to follow you,
That's
and that was
right. We
scary.
were in the because we were in like musical reuses because you were talking about
Yeah,
Chopin, I was talking about Bach. Yeah, that's right. Oh man, it's so funny.
I had to follow the opening paper.
Well, I'm glad it went well. I'm glad
Yeah.
Will Gibbons didn't hate me for telling him his footnote was wrong. Sort of. In a way, I was worried he was going to think that was how I was phrasing it. I was like, I don't want to be this upstart kid.
He might have thought it, but he didn't say
He might
anything.
have thought it,
Yeah,
but we're cool now. So
yeah,
he's even coming on this stream.
excellent.
So clearly he hasn't held it against me. Um, no one will. Well, again, his footnote wasn't. Yeah, his footnote wasn't wrong. It's just he was. It had nothing to do with the topic at hand. So he speculates about like why the audio was weird in that section, and so that was like the breadcrumb trail that I was like, oh, okay, let's actually look at it and figure
Yeah,
out what like why. So it's not really that he was wrong. It was just like that was the seed of me looking into it and figuring out like what's actually going on with the
yeah,
audio.
yeah.
Um,
So many great papers come from footnotes. I
yeah.
feel like every footnote is just another paper waiting to be written. So
Oh, I love that.
yeah,
That's just a beautiful statement.
yeah.
So anyway, this one again presented at Hartford. That what was that 2019?
Yes, last in person
Wow,
conference.
the last
So
in-person conference before the
yeah,
pandemic.
yeah,
Hugs to all.
yeah,
Yeah, and this one I remember was just absolutely stunning, and I was really excited because of the potential for engagement with the disability studies work
yeah.
as well, which apparently Neil got right on.
He did.
Because
Yeah,
you not only cite his work, which he's looked at representations of blindness in film, um, and you cite Diane Carr on horror stuff because there's some
yeah,
interesting the object bodies work
yeah.
comes up, and that's like all stuff that is just really interesting and really well suited for this work.
Yeah. Getting to talk about like horror media from that angle is really interesting and not something that I had really intended when I started this work. So
Yeah.
just following that line of thought, just being able to do that, it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's dig in. We start with Thomas Nagel's 1974 article, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And this is the human consciousness problem, asking readers to imagine themselves as an echolocating mammal, in this case, a bat. This paper is going to go into other echolocating mammals. And the quote here from Nagel is that bat echolocation is not similar in its operation to any sense that we possess, and there's no reason to suppose that it is subjectively like anything we can experience or imagine. This appears to create difficulties for the notion of what it is like to be a bat. We must consider whether any method will permit us to extrapolate to the inner life of the bat from our own case, and if not, what alternative methods there may be for understanding the notion. So that's kind of the seed of the problem. And as you point out, and as he seems to point out, a lot of folks really try to describe echolocation almost like an auditory seeing. And so they try really hard to like make that connection and emphasize similarities instead of recognizing like how big the gap is and just how much we can't know.
Yeah.
So where this comes into games is that it has been a mechanic or a visual effect or a narrative element in kind of a lot of games.
Yeah.
Despite this gap. So I quoted you a lot, and y'all just have to stop writing so well, because I'll be able to summarize more and not quote so much. You write, these efforts result in depictions of echolocation with varying degrees of fidelity and realism. Echolocation mechanics in games have provided spatial information through musical scales, maps, and even fully realized three-dimensional worlds. This diverse set of representations may be attributed in part to the inaccessible experience of the echolocating subjects. When a game designer sets out to recreate the concept of echolocation, they are often approaching the design problem from the perspective of a sighted, non-echolocating human being, one who is attempting to understand the subjective experience of the echolocator, but who has no first-hand knowledge of this ability. Which brings us to the Atari, which makes me very happy. Is this the first one you could find, or just like the first good example?
The first one that I could find, really, but there may be others. I don't know. I kind of just wanted to get something from kind of a few different points in the history of video games, and this was a great example. So it's just the one that I wanted to focus on first. But there could be another echolocating video game before 1983. So
yeah. So this is Matthew Hubbard's Dolphin for the Atari 2600. From 1983, and you play as a dolphin, surprisingly, being chased by a squid, and then you have to maneuver through small holes in walls of seahorses. That seems very coordinated on the seahorses, like making a wall for you.
They're very kind, these seahorses. They always leave one space to
You'd think like the dolphin could just like swim around, but we're not in 3D yet, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, the badges are from the original game manual. I took them and, alpha channeled around them in my image editor because I wanted those to just be standalone images in this. And I'm really excited about them. If anybody wants them for, I don't know, print them out and wear them.
Exactly.
I can send these to you. Apparently, so how did you get them originally? You can speak to this.
Yeah, you can see this in the manual, but if you get a certain point amount, 80,000 points, I think was the original one, you can take a picture of the screen and send it in, and they'll give you this Friends of Dolphins badge. And then if you get something like 500,000 points, you can send it in, and there's like a secret code that appears on the screen, and you can send that and become a member of the secret society of dolphins, which is pretty amazing. So,
yeah. So I didn't actually earn these yet. I do have Dolphin in my emulator, so I'll have to see if I can actually earn these for real.
Yeah, I wonder if Activision would still honor these, like send you some badge like this.
How funny! All right, this is what next time we're all together. Maybe I will pack a 2600. Or I guess we could do it on emulator. That would be easier. We could do it on emulator and then actually send it in and see. How
Yeah,
funny would that be? They probably
it would
don't
be
even have
amazing.
these anymore, but
Yeah, they probably don't.
if they sent like a little what if you got like an NFT of it because they're like
Oh,
nobody has thought to do this in the modern era. You now own the
exactly.
Friends of Dolphins NFT. Worth so much money, right? No.
Exactly.
No.
Yeah, we've got to do that.
Yeah. No NACFGM NFTs, please. Anyway, you play as a dolphin. You're being chased through the walls of seahorses, which again you could just go around, but whatever.
Yeah.
For our purposes, what's interesting is that before you see the seahorse wall, you get an audio cue that's going to tell you where to swim. And so the pitch indicates where it is. And only the 5 middle seahorses can be where the hole is. And so we have a transcription here of the pitches, which themselves are kind of interesting. What do we have? We have E, A, E, another. It's all E's and A's.
Yeah, and then that really high A up there. Yeah.
So yeah, all E's and A's.
Yeah, and not tuned perfectly either due to the Atari 2600, but these are like rough estimations. It's
right.
interesting that they're all like related by fourth or fifth, and that they get more spaced out as they go up.
To really help us differentiate.
Yeah, which is interesting.
I wonder if there's and maybe folks can speak to this in chat. I wonder if there is some kind of cognition literature that speaks to pitch sensitivity being better in the lower range versus the higher, and that maybe that's why they need to be like more spread out. What I remember from my classes is that babies cry right in the frequency that is our highest range of sensitivity, and that they think that that's an adaptation. Surprise, surprise! It's like they know.
Yeah.
That's the one that'll get your attention. So that's right where they cry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fletcher Munson curves. There we go. Okay. Yes. So yeah, we have that could be a reason. I would be interesting if we could like track down Matthew Hubbard and like ask if that was something that like when they tested they needed to make those pitches like a greater distance in order for it to be a clearer signal. I don't know.
We could check that out.
Yeah. We'll have to check that out. But yeah, so of course, this is now we're mapping onto a musical tone here for the echolocation. Dolphins don't actually sing pitches. Yeah. And at least not these specific pitches. So they echolocate using clicks. But on the Atari, we're going to represent that with the pitches here. So then the player has to attune to what note they're hearing and then maneuver from there. So here's a little bit of that. I like the way it pulses too, like it's coming back as an echo.
Yeah.
What are those little triangle things coming at you? What are those supposed to be?
So that's ocean currents.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So like that's not something you have to avoid.
No, it would just slow you down if it's pointing the opposite direction of your motion, hypothetically.
Okay.
Yeah. This game also was eventually turned into a couple other games. One is called Vogelfly, and Tubby Bird, which is like a bird character that's flying in the air and not in the ocean. But they don't describe it as echolocation because birds don't echolocate in this way. So at least I don't know any birds who do that. But it's interesting to kind of see how this mechanic was then used for something that was non-echolocation related. It was just a pitch that was high up there that you could hear and determine that spatialization. So it wasn't really based on dolphin echolocation. But that was obviously in a second version of this game that was sent out. So
yeah. And to be clear to Ryan, I'm not suggesting that they looked at academic research. I'm purely thinking like maybe they built it and then anyone playtesting was having a hard time differentiating, and so that made them spread the pitches out. That's just it's a thought. Because otherwise you're like, well, okay, what was the like what made you pick those pitches specifically? And the fact that they're related by like fourths and fifths is very structural, I guess. I don't know. It's like there doesn't seem to be any particular reason it would have to be one pitch versus another, but I'm guessing that the spread, there is a significance to the spread being what it is. So,
Perhaps.
because I can just imagine in the playtesting something like that coming up, and where somebody was having a hard time telling from the top two or something, so we made the top one really high or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, chat. I don't know any birds who do that.
Yeah, nope, not personally.
All right, so what I've identified as your thesis is when game designers ask what is it like to be a dolphin and choose to rely on their own experiences to answer this question, the mental images they create and the gameplay outcomes that result from them carry a vestige of their own perceptual and phenomenal understanding of the world. The subjective nature of experience promotes the diversity we see in representations of echolocation. So probably a couple different spots we could like narrow in and say a thesis, but
Yeah,
I think importantly here you're saying like it's coming out of somebody's own subjective experience plus the imagination of something very different.
Yeah. And I when I started watching the stream, I started thinking about when you asked me to be on, I started thinking, what is the thesis? I have no idea. Like, where is it? And I feel like that's a good pull, definitely. But I think I tried to stretch out. That introduction is very long and kind of deals with a lot of different things to kind of combine them into this idea. But I think that's a good thing to call a thesis. So
I am one of these days somebody's gonna come on and be like, that is not my thesis. Because it's not like, maybe I'll share a little bit of the PowerPoint in advance, but usually I don't have like the whole thing done.
Yeah.
Too far ahead. Although maybe I'll get a little better at it after my course splits here this month. Maybe in July I'll start getting like a few weeks ahead and I can start sending it to people.
I'm just going to say, Will Gibbons, don't just say that's not my thesis. And then he'll get you back for that footnote.
Yeah, so. He will. He'll finally take his revenge. Gibbons' Revenge sounds like an Atari game.
Yeah, we've all been Will Gibbons, so
we've all. Yeah, he's outstanding in his field. What can I say? So the walkthrough statement, which couldn't be clearer here because you start with in this article. Yeah. Sometimes people like get sneaky and they try to hide it.
Yeah.
Possibly because they don't like being so like in this article I will do XYZ. I think there are definitely academics that hate the whole idea of doing that. They're like, well, it should just be emergent, right? Like you should just know the structure by reading it. I think a lot of people appreciate it though. Readers really appreciate like, here's what's gonna happen.
Yeah, I appreciate it as a reader, so I put it in to most of the things I write. Sometimes I try to be sneaky, but really I do like in this article I'm going to do XYZ. And most of my presentations, like my PowerPoint presentations for conferences, they'll always have like this. I generally say it's like a 3 bullet point thing. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and kind of space it out in that way, and kind of put the presentation in my own mind for my own sake too. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it as like you said, a structuring tool for like myself. I can understand why Kate doesn't like that stuff, knowing how like organic Kate's. I mean, not just that she's looking at like environmental subjects, but like I feel like Kate's writing style is very organic. So like those are instances where I can see someone not literally organic, certified organic Kate Galloway. I can see places where that's like not everyone's favorite.
Yeah.
But
definitely.
and the abstracts help too, because abstracts kind of force that to be a thing as well. But you say in this article, I will examine these differing depictions of echolocation in video games, specifically focusing on how game designers use echolocation mechanics to consider the subjective experiences of player characters with reduced sightedness, visual impairment, or blindness. Video games commonly use visuals to represent the perspective of a subjective agent. For example, first-person games allow players to see through a character's eyes, but echolocation mechanics intermix sonic and visual effects, pushing the concept of sound toward the forefront when players attempt to engage and connect with the experience of a player character. To examine these mechanics, I will begin by discussing the philosophical underpinnings of subjective experience, specifically with regard to game design. I will then consider the mechanical aspects of dolphin echolocation before looking at representations of this concept in video games, with a focus on the Sega Genesis title Echo the Dolphin from 1992. Finally, I will examine depictions of human echolocation and how representations of disability interact with ideas of subjective experience. This article treats the representation of human echolocation as an extension of media depicting human blindness, helping underscore the discussion of subjective experience with its cultural implications. Nice, clear, like it's every single thing the article does.
Yeah.
And walkthrough statements can be shorter. Some people just have one point and they're just gonna, really prove it.
Yeah.
But when you have one that's kind of broad and far-reaching, where you're gonna look at
Yeah.
a couple different areas, it's nice to have a paragraph on it.
Yeah. It's a 30-page paper, so I feel like I afforded that, I
Yeah,
guess, in some way. So
I think so.
yeah.
Yeah, if you have that long of a statement and it's like, I don't know, 2,000 word article, you're like using half your words right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have our explanatory gap, and this doesn't come from musicology. Basically, relating back to the thesis that these representations are ultimately telling players more about their own individual perception than about actual echolocation. So did Nagel get you to Levine, or did you read them together? Were both of those inspired by the podcast?
Nagel got me to Levine, and I also thought about the perception of color when I was hearing about Nagel in that original podcast, though, because I'm colorblind. I'm a red-green colorblind. So this kind of it resonated with me in a certain way. And that was one of the things that was mentioned. But then I pulled this Levine article as kind of a representation of that. So it got me to thinking about this a little bit closer, about that subjective experience. So.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I love that Kate's spelling it echolocation, like Echo the Dolphin location.
Nice.
It's literally echolocation. Yeah. When we talk about the video game, Bat City becoming with bats in the Austin music scene. That's cool. Also gets into some of the same multi-species ethnography work. That's cool.
Very cool.
So there you go. If you're really interested in this bat stuff, we've got you in the chat. Go check it out.
Yeah, excellent.
So Nagel is basically saying like we can't really know what it is like to be a bat, and kind of getting into just how different of a mechanism echolocation is, and then just Levine is talking about this notion of the explanatory gap. We can describe and measure often things like physical processes, but subjective experiences those processes cause, there's a gap there. That we can't seem to cross. We can describe all the actions and the operations accurately, but then describing experiences gets very nonspecific very quickly.
Yeah.
And so this is the example you give, the perception of color, that the wavelengths are the same and they are measurable, but the differences in the visual mechanisms are going to lead to a difference in understandings of those colors. And so if I have a red apple and a green cucumber, I'm going to see it differently than you will, since you just mentioned that's interesting that's the example you gave, knowing that.
And it was just because it was one that I understood very well. So yeah.
Speaking of podcasts, it reminds me, my favorite episode of Radiolab ever is the color episode. Have you ever listened to that?
Oh, I may have, but I must have listened to it because I listened to a lot of Radiolab. So
I reference it like kind of too much because it's one of my favorites, but they talk about animals that have different numbers of like rods and cones in the eye, and how that changes the number of visible colors on the spectrum. And they talk about the mantis shrimp having like, I don't know, 18 cones or whatever, like however many cones it has, and just thinking like, we have 3.
Yeah.
What? And then just thinking like, man, it must be psychedelia down there in the ocean.
As psychedelic as mantis shrimp already are.
Yeah.
They're seeing it as well.
Because they're then able to see so far past, into like infrared, ultraviolet parts of the spectrum that we aren't sensitive to. So yeah, thinking across species and like, they don't even have the same colors as us.
Yeah.
And we have that a little bit. We have tetrachromats, but they're kind of rare because like the built environment doesn't really have a lot of opportunities for folks to do that type of color differentiation. Like if there are subtle differences, somebody might notice it, and somebody else might go, oh yeah, I don't really see those as different colors. But they get into that whole issue, and I think it's fascinating, that a lot of these people end up in creative, like artistic fields, like interior design and stuff, just because they have an eye for color. And how it's only women. So
Mm.
Only as far as I've seen, I don't think any men have. I don't remember if why that was. There were it's all been women so far. I don't know if it was connected to chromosomes or something, carrying like the possibility for the extra cone or rod or whatever. Anyway,
Mm.
Radiolab Color. I think it's just called Color. It's a really good episode. Everyone should check it out. It's kind of a similar thing, and talking about like the differences between the idea of these like wavelengths versus the actual perception.
Yeah.
Oh, Julianne. So our explanatory gap, we have incomplete solutions to bridging this, and this is where you get into David Chalmers. So this was directly out of that podcast, right?
Yes, and then I went to his work and his book, The Conscious Mind, and kind of dug in a little bit more. And this, like philosophy, is also it's not a field that I'm very well versed in, but I was just interested in it from this as a jumping off point. So yeah, kind of went to his original work on this, and it's far more complex than I can really understand as a music theorist. But it did give me kind of a beginning to talking about this in games, at least.
Yeah. And so the idea here is we can't really eliminate the gap. We can kind of shorten it
Yeah,
by, and he separates the mind into these different domains, and then kind of looks at how things interrelate between like physical and psychological or physical and phenomenal, triangulates from there. But even then, you can't really eliminate the gap.
yeah. I like the idea of defining what the gap actually is, like what
Yeah.
it. So just like giving you that sense of what it is. So our explanations and our ways of thinking about it can sort of define it, but still we can't cross it, I guess is the idea. So
Yeah. And then to relate it to game design, you say, we're usually not specifically getting into this philosophy of the philosophical question of consciousness because it's complicated. But game designers are engaging with it in kind of a roundabout way because they're often trying to answer the question, what is it like to be blank?
yeah.
And, not necessarily a bat. I'm sure there's a bat video game out there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
Batman.
There you go, Batman games. And here you're gonna look at Dolphin games, but in
Yeah.
any case, the player's going to have to use their imagination to fill in from there. Like there's things that they can do in the game mechanics to kind of build out an experience for you, but ultimately the player has to be actively involved in the process in order for it to work at all. So they're imagining what it's like to control perceptual, cognitive, and responsive capabilities. I love that you point out like a game like I Am Bread proves that the blank here does not even have to be conscious.
Yeah.
And that really speaks to like the imaginative power that like I don't know how much y'all have played I Am Bread, but like I assign so much of like an inner world to this piece of bread and like its struggles and
Yeah.
like I have like a personality for it in my
Yeah.
head based on how it's moving. And so we really assign like emotions and and all of this to things that aren't even conscious. Bread
Yeah.
struggles are real. That game is like intentionally very awkward because you have to control the four corners independently and like keep it off the floor, and it's lovely. But yeah, it doesn't have to be conscious.
Yeah.
And so what it gives us in the bread case, it gives us the outline of the bread's actions, its personality, its temperament, and mentality. But then we still have to incorporate our own experiences. We still have to sort of imagine from there.
Yeah.
And to some extent, we do this anytime there's a representation of another, but it's different when we're talking about game design, right? Like one could argue like, well, we have to do this imaginative gap filling with a character's internal life if we're watching a film.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as like I'm inhabiting this character.
Taking control of their actions and yeah.
Yeah, and I think the perspective matters here, the whole first versus third person
Yeah.
issue, and like in terms of there's like that double knowledge in a lot of kind of immersion and avatar theory talking about I know that this character is Mario, but I'm also Mario. Like, I am not a mustachioed plumber, but I'm sort of like projecting myself into Mario while at the same time maintaining like an awareness of this being a character with a certain personality. So anytime you have the third person perspective like that, it complicates this even further.
Yeah. And I made a point also in the article to include like 2D representations and 3D representation of third person games,
Mm-hmm.
and then also the first person game that we talk about at the end, perception. Um, it gives a little bit of difference in terms of what you're talking about through all of these different ways that you're interacting with the characters, and kind of lets you talk about that echolocation experience in different ways in games. So
Yeah. Oh, we'll get there, Ryan. It's Metroid Prime 2 Echoes gets brought
yeah,
up in this very article. How prescient of you. Maybe he read ahead. Maybe he read this
maybe,
right
yeah,
today. Because it ends up being actually a pretty big model for how echolocation is represented later on.
yeah,
So we have this gap, and Niggles, like, he can't solve it, but he wishes we could skip over the gap, right? And just instead of just imagining what it's like to be a bat, or sort of recreating it in the virtual world, what is it actually like? What is the objective experience of being a bat and experiencing batness?
yeah.
And you write that games can traverse the explanatory gap to a certain degree, but they also can't replace our own experiences. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
How would we even integrate that? Even if we could totally like set aside our own experiences and be that other thing, you would almost like come back to it not remembering the experience. Like I can't picture.
Well, there's a great example. I put this in a footnote. There's a great example from a TV show, Rick and Morty,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a video game that they play in that in the episode Morty Night Run, called Roy, A Life Well Lived. And basically, you just take over the experiences of a guy named Roy, live his entire life until you eventually die in his life. And then you're like zapped back into your body, and then you have all your own experiences. So,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Obviously, something that's only in the realm of science fiction, but
Right.
something that's in a footnote that somebody else can write another article about, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So,
Elizabeth said that episode messed me up. Yeah. I don't. It's not as bad as like the dog episode of Futurama, though, right?
oh yeah,
I've
that
only
was
ever watched that one once. I can't, and I'm not like a particular dog person, but that episode like wrecks
it gets you.
everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there are certain these cartoons, man. They when they hit
They
heavy,
do something.
you can't even watch them again. So games traverse this gap, and what's really fun here is that Nagel's using this bat in the essay precisely because so often people are trying so hard to sort of understand the experience that is so different that they're going to overemphasize similarities between echolocation and the visual mechanism. But he's saying, no, let's look at the differences.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something you get a lot of those similarities in scientific descriptions because they want to make some connection to how we can experience it. But it is very different. So, and impossible to really experience in that way. So,
Yeah. Yeah, also oof to BoJack. Same BoJack Horseman also like intense.
have not watched BoJack Horseman.
Oh
So,
man, it's like incredibly depressing. It's well done.
yeah.
It's well done, but it's like definitely I don't think that's like going to be a second watch for me ever.
Yeah.
So anyway, what are the differences between sight and echolocation? So you get into the mechanism a little bit here. Biosonar makes a sound and then echoes it back, and we don't have visual rays that we send out and then are getting back. We just have the sight data, I guess, entering our brain. So we are having a constant stream of reflected electromagnetic waves that are collected and decoded by the visual system. And so one of the big points here is that echolocation is active. It also varies by species too, but it is an active process, and sight is more passive. I mean, you can close your eyes and stuff, but
Yeah.
and you can obviously attend and focus on different things,
Right.
but you aren't sending out a visual ray that comes back to you.
Yeah.
And so games often represent this by requiring the player input for that echolocation mechanic. You have to like press a button in order to like make the sound that generates the map or does something else.
Yeah, and Dolphin, the Atari 2600, kind of, it's not that way, right? It
Mm-hmm.
is giving you those signals without any kind of button press that you're doing, so they're
Mm-hmm.
automatic. So a little bit different from that, but most games require you to like enact that echolocation.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That's why let me just like academically point out I love the word often. So when
Yeah,
we
I
say
probably use
that,
it
we
too
aren't saying
often,
it's
but yeah,
everything, right?
yeah,
Like that's exactly, you do not make a claim that every single game that does this does it that way, but you
yeah,
say it is
yeah.
very common that we do.
I'm sure I've made claims that are incorrect, so don't worry about it.
But it's nice that we leave ourselves a little bit of room by
Yeah,
just
try
saying
to.
we're seeing this a lot. So we're going to talk about what we see a lot of.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
by no means there are going to be, examples that contradict. Um, then you have an interesting, very broad definition of echolocation by this bioacoustics researcher Whitlow Au,
yeah,
who says the process by which an organism projects acoustic signals in order to obtain a sense of its surroundings from the echo it receives. And you're like, okay, cool, dolphins do that. But you're like, this actually applies to sighted humans. So the example you give and you come back to a couple times in the article are if you're hanging a picture and you're looking for a stud and you don't just have the stud finder, you might knock on the wall and notice the timbre change,
yeah,
indicating that there's something behind that spot.
yeah,
Yet most people wouldn't call that echolocation because you are requiring the second surface. You're not just like shouting at the wall and seeing how it reflects back.
yeah. And my intent here is not to say that like sighted humans, when they're like finding pictures on the wall, are echolocators. They may be to a certain extent by certain definitions that you can kind of see here, but really that it's kind of giving you this definition that I pulled, and there are many definitions for echolocation, but this one I intentionally pulled the broad one so that we could kind of compare and contrast human actions to the actions of dolphin echolocators, and then sighted actions to people who are non-sighted.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. And you do mention in there too that, and I think I have this on a slide somewhere, maybe. Humans are learning to echolocate in the blind
yeah,
community. That there are organizations that are actually promoting learning how to do this,
yeah.
and it's a pretty similar process, right? It involves clicks.
Yeah, generally clicks, and you can look. There's a guy named Daniel Kish who has a TED talk, which is very famous. But you can go and see that and see what that experience is like, and like he is able to like ride a bike around and do that stuff by learning to echolocate and kind of taking cues from animals who've done this. But some people come about it relatively naturally to be able to kind of work around the world. And there are other things. Some people have different echolocation mechanisms, so not clicking. But I cite a couple things in the article about how clicking is one of the most effective ways, and it's the most common way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's really for anybody that's read up on this at all. I've seen it, some things in disability studies relating to it that a lot of blind children sort of naturally
yeah,
do the clicking, and then it gets kind of enculturated out of that,
right. Because
because people
they're
are
being
encouraging them
yeah,
not to do it.
yeah,
And so there are organizations that are suggesting like, no, this could actually be a really really useful tool for people, that
yeah,
we should let people explore this, and have folks that can sort of help them hone that skill, because it's something that a lot of people are just doing sort of instinctively,
yeah,
to get around their environment. So yeah, it is interesting how many kids just stumble on it.
yeah, yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah. It does.
Because they're going to start recognizing the way sounds are reflecting back, when
Yeah,
they're making sound. So,
yeah,
um, even having a little one that's increasingly making noise, there's like if she stands in our front entryway, it echoes in a different way because the tile versus the carpet, and so
hmm,
she'll just stand there and just go like and just like you can see her like kind of looking at it like she's figuring out that there's an echo here.
yeah.
So
That's really interesting.
kids
I
are
don't know. I
fascinated by that sort of thing.
definitely, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So dolphins echolocate by click sound, and I love this part. It's generated in the nasal system and projected through the bulbous melon, which is the best term band name called it.
Yeah.
Like, you like blind melon? Try bulbous melon.
Yeah.
And it contains acoustic fat, which is another amazing term.
Yeah.
That helps convey the sound. And so then, of course, the time delay between the sound being emitted and hearing the echo determines the range of the object. So if there's a longer delay, the object is further away. And they then sense the echo through sound receptors in their lower jaws, which also have the acoustic lipid in them.
Yeah.
And then they generate a 3D map of their surroundings. And what's astonishing is they can differentiate like the type of object, the desirable objects like food versus something dangerous.
Yeah, due to the type of sound wave that they're getting back, I guess, that type of echolocating response. So, and just to kind of mention this, I pulled a lot of citations from that biologist Whitlow Owl, just to kind of use his definition and then kind of run through his research there. So I cited a lot of different things in this section, but I was kind of using him. He actually passed away when I was writing this article, but his kind of guideline for like thinking about echolocation was really kind of formative to the way that I was writing about it. So
I'm noticing people are agreeing that bulbous melon is a great band name.
Yeah,
so.
I like acoustic fat.
Acoustic fat's good too. Those are both. You've just generated so much joy with those two phrases.
That's good.
So then we get to Echo the Dolphin. I have it as 1994. It's 1992, right?
Oh gosh, now I'm losing it.
I think I wrote it down. Maybe I wrote it down wrong. When did the original Echo the Dolphin?
1992.
It was 92. Okay, so that was a mistype on my part.
Maybe Tides of Time was 94 or something. I'm not sure.
We're just gonna fix it.
Fix it live. We're gonna do it live.
Fix it live. Oop. Let's not get too far ahead of us. 1992. Save. Look at that. Great. Okay.
Perfect.
So sound helps build a map of the world, and actually our background here, other than the moment where I jumped over to the Atari background, this is from Echo the Dolphin. This is one of the background textures. So it's gorgeous. Sound helps build a map of the world by holding down the A button, which then sends out a sound and returns a map to the player. And you note that it's collapsing dolphin clicks for echolocation and the whistling communication with other dolphins, which are produced through different means, but we're just having them all as the same mechanism here.
Yeah. And just to kind of talk about that a little bit, the clicking, it does have some kind of social interaction, like when dolphins are interacting with each other, but generally is the thing that is associated with their echolocating ability. And then their whistles are those things that are potentially also used for location and like finding their way in the ocean, but are generally pointed more towards communication. So, but this collapses it into a single thing. Yeah, the dolphin song mechanic.
Yeah, and I guess you could have a one button map to, both. You could do both.
Yeah, if you wanted to make the game more complicated, I guess. But this game is already more complicated, so.
Yeah, this game gets surprisingly complicated. So the decision to kind of put it into one mechanic, we're gonna forgive.
Yeah.
But interestingly, because of the Sega Genesis and how sound is being produced, you note that the sound isn't a click; it's actually similar to sonar. So it gives the player almost like a submarine image because of and we sort of had that with the Atari Dolphin too. That kind of ping. Makes it, and the echo on it makes it sound almost like a sonar on submarine.
It gives us reference to the human experience of whatever that is, echolocation, instead of the dolphin experience. So trying to like make us empathize through this sound that you already know or something in that way.
And it's just got like it's got a nice resonance to it.
Yeah.
Dana and Kefka. So let's see a little bit of Echo the Dolphin. Also, this music slaps this whole game. So there, we talk to the other dolphin. Yeah, if anyone hasn't played this game is rad. I'm a fan.
Like I said yesterday, it's Lisa Frank meets Alien or something.
And if
it's
that's
really
an intriguing
great.
concept, like, because it starts out like, I don't know if y'all had anyone that like was in like a Lisa Frank or like very into dolphins as a kid, and they had like folders and stuff. But yeah, the storyline like kind of the bottom drops out at one point. You're just like, whoa, it gets really intense.
Yeah.
This would be a fun one to stream at some point. We should have you on to do this one. I also
Yeah,
want you to come on the Thursday night stream and do stacking with us.
that would be really fun.
I was saying that last night because of that paper. Because I think that one would be really fun.
If Ryan is playing this game, then I'm fine.
If Ryan's playing Echo,
I would not do this live.
Yes, all Sega games from the Saris Lab. Yeah, that's my question,
Yeah.
Ryan. Have you played Echo, and are you any good at it? Because that would be a fun one. But yeah, stacking I think is playable by any of us. I know I have it on mine because it's more puzzly. But
and a fun game to watch and stream. And
yeah, that would be you should come on with us. Let us know when you have Thursday nights.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
You could come and do a few weeks of that with us. Good at it as a kid. Yeah. Okay. So Ryan could potentially play this.
Yeah.
I know that. Yeah. Sometimes we practice before stream. Let's see. You also mention sounding, which I think I skipped over the initial mention to this. And Echo the Dolphin, they can only relay the character's potential experiences. So again, extra step from the players, kind of a theme we're coming back to. And what's interesting is how the game manuals for both Dolphin for the Activision from '83 and the Echo the Dolphin game manuals both have like extra info about dolphins in general, to encourage players to go out and learn more. The Activision one even has a thing where it's like, if you want to learn more about dolphins, check out your local library.
Which is wonderful. I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, facts about dolphins. We'll take a look here. Mentioning the speech, hearing, respiration, sonar, maximum velocity, info about their brains. And then there's a long quote from the Living Sea in the Echo manual. So I think that's the next slide here. Yeah. So on the left here is the Dolphin manual for the Activision. You can see this beautiful illustration. We have like little things about, okay, we must surface for air, breathe through blowhole, hearing, ears receive sonic emissions from underwater scanning. So like just like a little bit of info.
And nothing to do with gameplay. It's all just about teaching you about dolphins, which I think is really interesting and intriguing.
Yeah. Tursiops truncatus.
Yeah.
And then below, dolphins have amazing abilities and have often used them to help people, saving swimmers and boats in distress. Find out more at your library. I love that.
Yeah.
This is how you do edutainment. I agree. A good manual is a thing of beauty, and a lot of them have been scanned in their entirety and put online by people who are really into this. I love the like material culture around early gaming. And honestly, modern games, when they like release stuff with it, when it comes with some kind of physical element, that's like amazing. I'm a big fan.
Or if they try and replicate it in some way by sending out a manual that comes with their game or something, even if it's a digital manual. I love having that stuff. It's fun to dig into.
I'm a huge fan. Yeah. Yeah, even if it's like a menu on the game and then you flip through, but it looks like an old manual. I'm okay if it's even just that.
Yeah.
I love the kind of nods to the external, material culture. Yeah. And yeah, it is a very tiny Switch game cartridge. It's like very easy to lose the game. This is why you have to get like the little things to carry around your games in, or just keep them in the original.
I keep them in the original. I wish that they would stuff more manuals in there.
Yeah,
right?
they have an opportunity.
Put a ton of stuff in there.
Missed opportunity here.
Yeah.
So on the right we have the Echo pages here with much more in-depth dolphin facts, because this is in prose and not just a an image. Neat stuff. And then we have the quote from The Living Sea here by Cousteau. So just beautiful, prose description. And like they chose to make this a whole page in their manual. So they're really highlighting it for the player.
Yeah.
So
they essentially, just to talk about that, they essentially are wanting you with your own experience to have that feeling of being a dolphin, and they're doing it through this outside information that they're giving you, which is a little bit different than later representations that we see of echolocation. But it's interesting that these games kind of do it in the same way. So
yeah. So then we get to 3D gaming, and this is where Metroid Prime 2 Echoes comes back. Games in the later 90s and early aughts gave players some control over the camera. So Mario 64 and Tomb Raider and those sorts of things, and looking around the surroundings becomes normal. So just that, I like your point there that like the giving the player different control over the visual mechanism and sort of like helping them to orient themselves in 3D space actually allowed for us to start normalizing other representations of human echolocation in gaming as like another way of mapping one's space. Because then it's like there's already pieces of this visually that are familiar to us. And so introducing another mechanic to sort of fill out, the space and allow us to sort of look around sort of helps make that more common. And the Echo Visor in Metroid Prime 2 allows Samus to progress by finding invisible sonic emitters, which you note is that's the only thing you need to do to complete the game, but it also has like a sonar mode that maps the surroundings. You can use it where everything goes into kind of a monochromatic color palette and just very simplified, like outlined object textures. And you note here that this kind of becomes the influential way of depicting this. And again, was this just you kind of looked for the earliest version of doing it this way? And
yeah, I did a little searching after I was pressed on this, but this is the earliest depiction of that like first person echolocation that I've seen. There may be, like I said, there may be others out there, but this is the first one that I could find.
And certainly it's like a well-known enough franchise. Like you could argue
Very
even
well
if there's
known,
another one, maybe it was more of an indie game, but this one certainly like popularizes the mechanic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to text really quick. Okay. So then we get to perception and blind, although more the emphasis is on perception as a case study here. They both incorporate a mechanic that requires player characters to tap a cane against surfaces and objects in the game world to produce auditory signals and thereby illuminate the character's surroundings, which is a visual representation of the echoing sound waves. And here, this is just how beautifully unified this article is. You noted earlier how Echo conflated communication and echolocation abilities into a single interaction. Here, we're sort of conflating the experience of blind users in that echolocation and the use of canes aren't generally the most salient part of like echolocation for the blind. Canes are generally about touch. And not that they can't be used in this way to tap and make sound, but they're not like the primary mechanism when folks are echolocating. So similarly, we're collapsing these into a single mechanic.
Right. And I do make mention in one of the footnotes of one echolocator who uses the cane primarily for that, to hear different sounds that are coming off of the cane and use that as like your general echolocation. But it doesn't exactly map to that like dolphin echolocation, so to speak, where you have something that you're producing internally, I guess. But but it can be used in that way. But what we see in these games is kind of a conflation of those two things: one for the navigation with a cane and kind of feel, and the other navigation with voices clicking, which we see is kind of the more popularized version of echolocation. So.
And that's again because how would we? You can have like kind of like invisible walls where you can't progress forward, like if you hit something, but like to have the sensitivity of the cane being able to that's a much harder game mechanic to translate, I think.
Yeah.
So
And
again, we're kind of making a concession to like what's playable.
right. And we get into the real question now because we're dealing with like representations of disability, where what is a good way to represent this? Is there a good way to represent this? And um, I feel like, I butt up against those issues in the article a lot and
Yeah.
try and dig into what is uh, the intent and then what is the result there.
Yeah. So right off of that, there's this notion of like realism, and you say that this conflation is mostly a problem because the perception creators were always hammering about the authenticity in their discussions of the game design's philosophy. And you cite a few different times interviews with Bill Gardner, who was Perception's creative director, and he talks about, oh, I turned my phone to text to speech and I was doing daily tasks with my eyes closed to kind of like get a sense, which you noted immediately. Aaron Hawley has criticized this blindfold for a day approach, and this is common in the design world too. The idea that like,
yeah, that's the world that Bill Gardner comes from too,
right,
just to kind of see that. So
right. The issue here being, you have to like live in it for more than a day, because you're going to have all this awkwardness, and like you're not going to have any of the part where you actually adapt to the lack of sight and are able to navigate the space better. So then when we're designing around me having a blindfold for a day and stumbling around and being awkward, it means that you're sort of doing things that are very unnecessary for somebody who inhabits that experience regularly. And so there's a lot of, this thing is being designed as if it's with me in mind, but actually it's like totally unnecessary.
right.
And like, why don't you just ask someone who's blind? Or in the case of user design for that sort of thing, it's like, why don't you just have someone with that experience making suggestions for how they want the product to be manipulated.
Yeah. And this is something to kind of get into. Like, I'm pretty sure, this is from my memory, that Bill Gardner did talk to Daniel Kish, who's the teacher of echolocation to a lot of people, and but they didn't use that mechanic that he used, the clicking sounds. They used the cane navigation instead. So I don't know, some things he took, like he has some depictions of like day-to-day life for people who are blind in the video game,
Right.
but he also has these other things. And I don't want to assign necessarily blame, but I do
Right.
think that there's this idea of like, what does that mean that you're trying to like promote authenticity when
Right.
you're doing this? And I think it really does get down to that problem of subjective experience, that like we're really digging in now to a problem that we cannot solve. There's no real solution to this, not to give away the ending of the article, really.
And he even specifically states in the interviews how they had to add more visual detail in the world
Right.
in testing because the players were getting really frustrated. So it's again
Yeah.
why we were thinking about like Dolphin and Matthew Hubbard, and like, why did you pick the pitches you picked, like wondering if there was something there with testing. Here we have someone specifically saying like, we actually had to make the world even more visual because it was too hard. Like it just wasn't working well for players. And then kind of dials back from the authenticity to just say, well, perception was never meant to be a simulation. It still has to be fun.
Yeah.
My gamers still need to want to play it, which
Yeah.
you point out you're trying to do both. Therein lies the problem. You're trying to do both. Are you recreating the feeling of being a blind person, or are you appealing to the intended audience of sighted players by not fully simulating the blind experience? So then we're trying to balance representation and entertainment and maybe even a little education. That's kind of difficult to accomplish. And it has the potential to be really damaging to the represented group because it can kind of fall into stereotyping, and that Joseph Bine described the depiction of blindness as commodification instead of representation, which I thought was a really good way to put that.
Yeah.
That perception is a really excellent example of how something can be two things at once. Like, it's like, yes, there's representation. Like, yes, it's another example of this, and that can be an important moment, and that can be meaningful for some people, but
Yeah,
it can
and
also
I
be
cite some of those.
exploitative.
Yeah, I cite some of those people as well because like there are some people who this really connected with in that community, and so I feel like that's an important thing to mention is that that representation is incredibly important if we're going to be doing this in a medium.
Right. The
Uh,
solution isn't just never attempt this. It's
right,
let's be
and so
thoughtful
and
about what
that's
it
why that
means to do this
I have
representation.
exactly, yeah, and so I think that you have to have these issues come up, and how you deal with them is going to be like the real telling point of the result.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there is like I get to at the end. I don't know if there is like a truly ethical way to represent this. Right? Is if these things are being used for entertainment in this way, like um, so I don't know. That's a constant question
That's
there.
something that came up in my dissertation a lot too,
Yeah.
is like I'm not I might be looking at representations that are actually pretty negative, but it isn't me like casting judgment on the video game as a whole because it's participating in this very broad media landscape and kind of cultural and social perceptions of meanings of disabilities. So it's like I'm not knocking the games specifically for kind of doing what everything else is doing, but like let's just, like uncover this a little bit, look at the mechanic, look at how it's being introduced and how it's kind of participating in that system.
Yeah.
But that I think we need to just allow for things to be both. I always use the example in disability courses of the Lady Gaga paparazzi video, and has the she's in the wheelchair at the beginning, and then there's like a big dance sequence where she is no longer in the wheelchair and she gets up and does her Lady Gaga choreography that's very distinctive. And there were folks in the wheelchair using community that were like, oh my gosh, look how like glamorous, it's like a gold like designer wheelchair,
Yeah.
how cool. And then there were other people that were like, dude, Lady Gaga like should not be pretending to be a wheelchair user when she has never had that experience, and like that's akin to blackface. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And pointing out like these are both folks that have like the lived experience to really speak to it, and it's allowed to be both at once, and it's allowed to cause different reactions. Like
Yeah.
disability isn't a monolith, so
Right.
like no area of identity is going to be a common experience for every single person.
Yeah. And I
So
think that we understand that as the basic point of subjective experience, that
yeah,
it's just so,
yeah, that there's going to be commonalities, but in the end, there may never be a perfect representation.
right.
I guess the only perfect representation is sort of like you representing yourself to yourself in
Yeah.
that sense.
A video game called Me,
Yeah,
and I'm
there's
just
no
going to make it for
experiential
myself.
gap there,
Yeah.
where you're trying to imagine otherwise. But
Right.
other than that, we're going to have attempts to represent experiences that are very different from one another, because that mechanism is important to us as a
Yeah.
species. We like storytelling, and we like sort of that empathetic identification with others and imagining. But there are definitely more and less sensitive ways to do that type of representation, which is a point here. So it can be both. So we speak to perception and horror a little bit. And this is sort of where you bring in some of the disability studies work on representing blindness in film, and some of the horror literature. You cite Neil Lerner in here, and talk about how, in general, this one isn't particularly using the blind character to like shock the player or like present them as like grotesque, but instead we're playing on a childhood anxiety of fear of the dark, and wanting to use that echolocation mechanism to understand our surroundings. But the game actually has enemies that can detect sounds in a lot of these games that are produced by the player actions. So then, like, though you have the ability to map your environment, you don't want to overuse the echolocation mechanic, because then things are going to come after you. And I think this is a really smart point where Gardner notes that information is the enemy of horror.
Yeah.
So like the idea of not being able to get a full picture, or that like you can have like a flash of it and kind of see ahead of you a little bit with the mechanic, but it doesn't stay there. You have to like keep pinging it for it to stay up, and that there are other things in the game that are going to prevent you from doing that and just making it a constant like here's the map.
Yeah.
That could hinder the attempted representation. Absolutely, and drawing like a horror connection here. So important implications here.
Yeah.
So we'll watch an example of this game, but Cassie ends up tapping her cane to both illuminate the surrounding objects, and it produces that resonant sound associated with the object being struck. And then you actually have links to the videos in the original article, and then you sent them to me, so I have them, which is nice because I didn't have to track down like long plays or get my own footage, which saves a bit of time.
Yeah.
So the video here is a flashback to Cassie's first experience with echolocation, and you note how it works. Any sound source casts a wave of monochromatic light into the game world, representing the perceived sound waves echoing off of nearby objects.
Focus, Cassie. What's this sound?
A fan.
Good. Now, what's in front of the fan?
I don't know.
Cassie, sounds are how we see. Listen. Tap your cane.
It's a coffee mug.
Right. Excellent. Though you are without sight, it does not mean you cannot see.
So there we had kind of similar to the Metroid in the earlier examples. You get kind of that burst of light, and then just to pause it in the middle, you can see how like the wave kind of echoes out, and then like the lighting changes, and you get this kind of outline of the desk, but it's not every single little detail of the desk. The fan is rendered in pretty exquisite detail though there.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of focusing on it, I guess. It's like a way of kind of visually telling us like we're really attending to that fan.
Yeah.
And then you note that ultimately this is actually kind of like the stud finding example. You know, the sighted person trying to hang the picture and knocking on the wall, because we're not simulating actual human echolocation, because we start having a little bit more artistry maybe in the visual representation, where the echolocation doesn't just tell you there's a wall, it shows you the pattern of the wallpaper when you're echolocating. So perception's depiction of echolocation is an artistic interpretation filtered through the experiences and imaginations of a sighted development team, and not an actualization of the experience of being an echolocator. So I think this is... There we go. There's some wallpaper.
Yeah.
And you can see the use of color too.
Yeah. Color indicating memories and echoes in different ways, and so.
Love the timbre of that.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Ominous strings.
Yeah. And the sound there that comes in at the end is not something that's like assigned to that specific moment. It's something that just appears randomly as you're playing to kind of give you that spooky effect.
Oh, so it's not oh no, there's something coming.
Not right at that moment. It's just something that kind of happens randomly to make you feel a little bit unsettled.
And kind of going along with the information being the enemy of horror too, when there's like that sort of like randomness and you can't assign like a specific source to something, that's a really good tool for creating anxiety in a player, when you're like, okay, I'm hearing what in other games I've maybe been taught to treat as a cue, a signal that something's wrong or something's approaching or I'm in danger. I'm entering a combat area or something. And here they just have it appear at random, and then you're like, well, what can I trust?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Jim Bonney, who I cite a little bit in the paper, they worked on so many different sounds for this game. This is an indie game, which is kind of surprising. Like it's a very small development team, and so they really worked towards like creating this spooky soundscape and they focused a lot towards authenticity and like creating different footstep sounds and different room sounds, and how that sound design was like really unique to every space in the game, and the different timelines in the game. If you know anything about this game, it's really weird. But so there's a lot that they actually did to kind of focus on that sound there. So that authenticity is still kind of creeping through in those moments. So.
Yeah. So we've alluded to this, but your conclusion is, this imperfect representation of echolocation isn't just games mischaracterizing actions. It's also just a limitation of the medium to reproduce the inner life of any other being, not just echolocating ones. Games are not simulations, which is actually what Gardner said specifically about this game. It's not a simulation. It's meant to be fun. Games are not simulations, nor are they magical corrective lenses that allow us to experience other perspectives without prejudice. Rather, they are mirrors that elucidate our prejudices. So pretty much said it better than my dissertation did. Right?
I don't think that's true.
That's an argument that I made, but I didn't say it nearly that pretty at any point in my dissertation. But yeah, again, it's like I'm not being like, oh, you games, your representation is bad. It's like the whole system is full of wide variety of representations, and there are some common tropes that have coalesced, and we really need to examine them.
Yeah.
So instead of answering Nagel's question about what is it like to be a bat or a dolphin or a piece of bread or anybody else, we should consider what it means for us to ask it. So like any good article, you kind of get to the ending here with more questions and more places to take it. Yeah.
And I feel like that was one of the reasons that I spent so long on the end of this article too, was I didn't know a good way to like end it. I don't know if I had any answers to those questions, so I figured I would just let them kind of play out. And I think that is really the point of the article, is to just kind of point out that those questions exist in the medium.
Right. So to kind of wrap up questions here, you mentioned, turning this around. I guess I didn't ask too much about, was this just an independent submission to JSMEG, or did somebody like invite you to submit it, or?
So they once they heard the presentation, they reached out and sent me a message and said, hey, we'd like to have this in. So, but I submitted it through the regular process and did that. So,
yeah.
But it took a long time, because I had a few options. Once I got done with the presentation, I could like spend a year diving into that other study, the disability studies material, and really take it on. And that, or I could send a shorter article that didn't do that, but I wanted to dive into it a lot more. So it took a lot longer. It became a lot longer piece, but I think it was worth it in the end for me. Honestly, I learned a lot going through it, because it's not literature that I was familiar with as much before.
Yeah.
So.
And how was the experience with like the reviewers? Did you have pretty favorable responses from your readers?
Yeah, there were only a couple things to kind of respond to and change about the article. Honestly, it was a really a good experience. I've had some other experiences that have not been as good, but for this article, it was really good. I think that extra year might have helped to do that. So it was a time thing.
Yeah.
But I do think that I had great readers who gave some really good feedback, gave me some additional citations and some other ways to take things. It didn't change too much about the article, but I was able to add some things to it. Honestly, the most exciting part about the process was the copy edit that I got, because the copy editor, I can't remember his name, but he was fantastic. He was talking to me about like, oh, well, when it's Microchiroptera, the bat, versus Tursiops truncatus, we italicize it when it's the species specific or the family name or something. So, like, giving me all of that information, stuff that I never would have known. So that was a fantastic process, but it was relatively easy. And I would encourage everybody to send their stuff to JSMIG. So
I see Elizabeth is in chat. Matt is apparently the
Matt,
editor's
thank
name.
you, Elizabeth. Yeah.
But also I know she'll agree with that statement about please submit to JSMIG, y'all. But I love your point about like letting this percolate and taking a little bit of extra time to kind of go and explore this other avenue that had been brought up, because ultimately I always say when a conference paper kind of just gets turned around almost immediately, sometimes the paper is stunning and it works, but I really like to see where somebody has like used it as a jumping off point and gotten all the feedback, taking that Q&A, and then, there's some transformation into the final version, because ultimately I think we're using these conferences as a testing ground, and we want hopefully we want people to challenge us and to give us new ideas and literature that we haven't seen yet, and just different ideas that might make it even richer. So here we had what was already a phenomenal conference paper just turned into just such an astonishing article that both goes into some realms that haven't really been explored yet in the field, but also gives so many more avenues to explore at the end. You kind of get into like, here's all the other places we can take this.
And I hope somebody does too, because it's there's a lot. I have 80 something footnotes in this paper that you can all just like mine for material.
They're great.
Yeah, so please do that.
My question is, are you doing anything further with this?
Not
Has this
necessarily
expanded in any particular way for you?
It has not, other than the fact that like the general idea of the subjective experience has kind of led me to other things. So not specifically down the route of disability studies, but my thoughts in this paper have really made me rethink some of the representations that we have in video games. And so I'm trying to work through some of my thoughts on that now, and like how we're representing certain ideas. So I don't know, it's going to become something. But it's a little bit nebulous at this point. I'm working on a lot of other things that are back from other conference presentations that I've done. But this will get picked up in the philosophical side, at least, if not the disability study side, or the continued study of dolphins in video games, which would also be very fun.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So this has been our stream for today. I'm really glad you were able to join me. This was on my short list from the beginning of the stream. I made a list of like, what are some of my favorite things in the field? What would I like to highlight? And then I just started sending the emails, hoping everyone, sending the messages, hoping folks would want to do this.
It was an honor. It's a great idea for a stream. And I'll say this until, the end of time here, because it's just really great to have an academic space like this where we're kind of diving in and doing all this work on really great literature. So it's been fantastic to watch the streams. So thank you.
I've enjoyed it. And then lastly, just to close us out, I wanted to see what OC Remix had, especially because Ryan mentioned last week that they're safe for Twitch and I won't get struck. So I looked, and there is a pretty killer Echo the Dolphin arrangement here that I thought we would just take a little listen to close us out, because it's got the sonar in it. This is definitely a pop. I had this on loop the other day.
Yeah, I have an entire Echo playlist that I pull from, so I'll put this on there.
mentioned that you had the playlist, so I was like, oh, this is
Yeah.
this is a fun one. I
that's a
like
good
what
one.
they do with the original sounds kind of timbrally, to
Yeah.
really kind of play on like on our sense of underwaterness. So really excellent. And let me just pop that open really quick because I don't remember who this is by, and I want to make sure it's right here. This one is DJ Pretzel, so our founder of OC Remix, as Ryan indicated to me last time. So, you looking forward to your research on cat sounds?
Yeah, it's coming up. Oh, what is that new cat? There's a new cat video game. What is it called?
Oh, is it the one? I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, where the cat is interacting with robots or something like that.
Yes, Stray, is that it?
Stray, yes.
Yeah.
Stray research has to happen no matter what.
Yeah, so. Whether or not it turns into an article.
Yeah.
I think some of us like prioritize our research based on the game we want to play and not like it doesn't emerge out of gameplay. Sometimes it's purely like I want an excuse to play this game.
Yeah. And this is something like I'd never played Echo the Dolphin when I was a kid. I didn't have a Genesis. So like coming back to it and playing it and experiencing how weird and difficult it is, it's something to really do. So I think it's a fantastic game. And like we didn't talk about this much in the stream, but Ed Annunziata, who was the creator of the game, like has just some really interesting stories about its creation and like discussions of where it came from and the ideas. And he talks a lot about that on Twitter and talks to people. So it's really intriguing. So
look up Ed on Twitter. And then this is open access, right now? It
is right now. And Elizabeth maybe could let us know if that's going to change. I have no idea if that is something that's ongoing or if it's just for right now. But my thanks to Elizabeth and Tim, who were my contacts, and for helping get this published. It was a really great experience to work through it.
Yeah. So JSMIG is going to be, a major source for us to pull for this stream, and of course we'll be going through the edited collections. And we will never run out of material because I didn't start this right when there wasn't that much out yet. So very early on I had like oh no, like what am I going to get on the stream? And I was like, once I get into this, I think it'll be get easier and easier to keep recruiting people as new stuff comes out.
Oh yeah, there's an endless amount of things coming out that are always great. So
hopefully as more things are coming out, come back and talk about the next ones with me. Thank you so much for being here. Next week,
thank you for having me.
We have Elizabeth Medina Gray, and we're going to be looking at beep speech, right? I believe that's the chapter in the new Cambridge Companion, right? Unless I'm totally wrong, but I think next week is. I should have checked this. It's next week is the AMS Ludomusicology Study Group collab. So I don't know who will be on as our rep from that. Maybe Stefan, if Stefan's up for it. Yes, there's a bit of beep speech. There's other things too. But yeah, this is the most recent. Let's see. Interacting with soundscapes, music, sound effects, and dialogue in video games in the Cambridge Companion to Video Game Music from 2021. So the big book. I think this is the first one we're looking at from that Cambridge Companion. That one's going to give us a lot of source material for the stream. There's a lot of good stuff in that one.
We have a pink book, a green book, and a big book.
Yeah, big book. Yeah, Cambridge doesn't really have a particular color, does it? It's just big. Oh, it's kind of purplish. Magenta. The magenta book.
The big magenta book.
Yeah. The pyramid book. It's got like the.
I have a digital copy. That's too big for my bookshelf.
Oh yeah, and they sent me two, and I was like, that's amazing. I feel like I should give one away to someone that doesn't have one. That's an idea. So if anybody needs a copy of the Cambridge Companion, DM me and maybe I can ship it to you. It's hefty, but I'll send it to you for the cost of shipping or whatever.
Stream giveaway. Yeah.
There you go. Stream giveaway. Somebody can win a copy. I'll come up with something for that. Yeah, and then Oxford, I'm going to have to buy because I pulled my chapter from that Oxford handbook because of life happening in November. So I feel like everybody's in that Oxford book that's coming out. But I'm not, so I'm going to have to buy it. So this is why you're seeing Billie Eilish ads. If I ever make any money off the stream, it's just going to buy the edited collection. I won't for a while because I know you have to have a minimum threshold that you've made in order for them to even, I think you have to make $100 or more for them to like cut you a check. But if I ever make any money off of this, I'm just going to buy books with it. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you all next week. Go listen to some Echo the Dolphin. The original soundtrack is pretty excellent working music, I think. I feel like it kind of gets you in a zone. Unless you're one of those people that can't work with music on because you get too distracted listening. I think a lot of us do that too. But if you like working to music or, going for runs with music, the Echo the Dolphin soundtrack is a good place to start.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you all next week. Bye.